puts up a three. Yes! And
on the Believe Network, presented by Bet Online. Our final days of March 2025. Getting into our opening show this week. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He is my co-host, Neil Meyer, from rival Cincinnati site, thefrontofficenews.com. And you can catch my work on Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. A shakeup in the Crosstown Shootout. We will get to that to start things off with this show, as Sean Miller swiftly, after beating Texas in the first four last week, becomes the head coach of Texas at the end of the week, before the calendar even moves to where we are today on Monday. We'll get to that to start off the show, look at some of the transfer contacts so far as the opening days of the college basketball spring portal window are here. And then we'll look at some of the top thing that Neil Meyer and I are watching out for as practices ramp back up following spring break for Cincinnati football on the springtime line this week and beyond. A kind of run of about three or four straight weeks of practices coming up for Cincinnati Bearcats football. So very excited about all that. But first, we have to tell you about Bet Online, our wonderful presenting sponsor. They are the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all of the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest. Bet Online continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. Neil Meyer, just as the wheel spins on the sands of time, things just keep looking similar and similar for Xavier basketball. They have Wes Miller exit the program 16 years ago around this time and promptly replaced him with Chris Mack. And now, Neil, Sean Miller once again exiting for a bigger job, heading to Texas, who fired Rodney Terry this past week. And Xavier reportedly interested in doing the same thing once again. College of Charleston head coach Chris Mack, first year back in the sport in 2024-25 after 2 years off. According to Fox 19's Jeremy Rao, there is mutual interest from both sides of that equation to run it back with Chris Mack, who had a lot of success at Xavier across his 9 seasons and went 6-3 against the Cincinnati Bearcats in the Crosstown Shootout. Big couple days in this rivalry, Neil.
Yeah, not only that, Russ, but this was something that caught Xavier fans by complete surprise. I mean, right? Especially after you make the tournament, you beat Texas, and it felt good for Sean Miller to low-key get his get back, because in year one, under Sean Miller, he gets knocked out of the NCAA tournament by Texas.
Life comes at you fast, Neil.
if you can't beat him, I guess you join him, even though he beat him last week. I don't know. It's a weird thing going on, but
if you can't pay him like Texas can, then you're going to Texas. Yeah. I think is a better phrase, Neil.
And I think everybody kind of knew that was probably what what was going on behind the scenes. Was Texas money is not Xavier money. Let's put it that way. And on top of it, Russ, I mean, you would think Sean Miller wouldn't step back in Norwood if this all goes down like it's anticipating to. It won't be a good reunion if he comes back in Norwood, considering he left Xavier for Arizona the first time, and he left abruptly when the bigger school came calling. And Xavier gave him a second chance, right after all the NCAA scandals that went down, and how this just kind of went down again. It kind of reminds you of the first exit. But I know Xavier fans are very unhappy, but it's going to be a new shakeup in the crosstown rivalry. Obviously, you mentioned Chris Mack. There is potential mutual interest if you are obviously in the business like we are. There was some posts that were out there of private jets coming into Lunkin. One just happened to be from Charleston. So landed last night around 10 p.m. So, I mean, overall.
I mean, Neil, at this point, I would be honestly shocked if we aren't leading the show on Thursday with Chris Mack
With
being
Chris
the
Mack.
new head coach at Xavier. I would be floored at this point if that's not who it is. Another maybe possible name is UConn bench coach Luke Murray. Obviously, I think he was a part of Chris Mack's staff for a time. At least he's had ties to, I'm pretty sure, Xavier, and is a part of that Big East coaching tree. So that's another possibility. But yeah, as you mentioned, Neil, the wheels are turning already on this venture.
Yeah, and everybody knows Chris Mack still has a house in Cincinnati. He's been here for the last few years, so it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And he's a guy who understands NIL and whatnot, so could be a potential reunion for Xavier. But man, Russ, think about how crazy it would be. You go Sean Miller, Chris Mack, and then Travis Steele's 45 minutes up the road. I mean, that would be crazy to think about. But overall, look at where they're sitting right now. I mean, it's not ideal for Xavier, especially when you lose most of your guys to graduate. And they've been playing transfer portal pickups for the last 2 years now under Sean Miller. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Xavier. But I fully expect this to be a Chris Mack reunion, like you said, to start the show on Thursday. But if I'm Xavier fans, I'm not happy with how things transpired over the last 24 hours, to say the least.
It is what it is. Chrysler 300 looks like a Phantom, Neil, until a Phantom pulls up, and that's exactly what Texas did to Xavier in this instance. They fully phantomed them out of the Sean Miller business. Chris Mack, like you mentioned, Neil, the flight logs, the way they look, the fact that Chris Mack has lived here for multiple years after getting the can at Louisville and taking 2 years off before coaching at College of Charleston, where he had strong success in his first year in 2024-25, led them to a 24-9 record in the CAA. So I would be shocked, Neil, if not by Thursday, within a week from now, starting off next week's show, we're not talking about Chris Mack as the next head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, but you never know. Crazier things have happened. And I'm sure that would be, I would say, palatable for Xavier fans to get Mack back. I mean, he was very good at Xavier during his time there. 215-97 record, 8 NCAA tournament appearances, 4 Sweet 16s, and they went to the Elite Eight in 2017. I mentioned earlier, a 6-3 record across that 9-year run against Cincinnati. Chris Mack knows how to win at Xavier. He knows how to get it done in the Big East. And he's been a part of the program for a long time. Pretty sure was a part of Sean Miller's bench, part of his coaching crew when Miller was the head coach there originally back in the mid-aughts. So big couple days in the Crosstown Shootout rivalry portion of things, and a big couple days for Cincinnati basketball's outlook roster-wise for the 2025-2026 season. Now, Neil, there has not been reported confirmation of Cincinnati hiring a GM just yet. So we're still waiting to see who's going to be ultimately pulling the strings as the main kind of maestro of this spring transfer portal window acquisition timeline. But there have been kind of contacts already so far by Cincinnati in this window. We'll get to those right now as we think about the Bearcats reaching out to Seth Hubbard, sixth man for Toledo, who didn't have wowing stats this year, 37.9% shooting, 8.4 points, 2.4 rebounds with the Toledo Rockets, and Zarik Nutter, 6'7", 210-pound forward, averaged 14.2 points and 3.1 rebounds for Georgia State this past season. He has one more season of eligibility due to the JUCO rulings that are happening in recent months. And that ruling, Neil, confirmed that Day Thomas will be able to come back, which we kind of guessed, and it was the cement was laid down in December, and we were just waiting for it to fully dry out and become cemented, so to speak, with that ruling happening in the last 10 to 14 days or so. But Neil, we'll get to the other couple of portal contacts after I get your thoughts on these guys. But it looks like, especially with Nutter, a 6'7", 210-pound forward, this is the kind of body size and wing profile that Bearcats fans are wanting to see them add this spring.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And that's, like you mentioned too, that's a big time power forward, right? You look down at the stats from Georgia State. 6'7", 210, 14 points a game, 50% from the field. That's kind of what Cincinnati was looking for this year, right? You had a couple guys in that position who they were expecting to see that number from, but they haven't. And overall, I mean, you like to see them making that contact right now between him, Jakari White, out of North Dakota State. It's kind of interesting to see the couple guys and the couple names that we've seen targeted. But overall, it's good to see them going after a veteran wing player, especially at Georgia State. And he does have that extra year, like you mentioned, because of the COVID year, and that kind of solidifies the news of Day Thomas coming back. So overall, that is huge for Cincinnati, and it's huge to see them kind of getting active early in the transfer portal aspect as well.
Yeah, and some of the other names I've reached out to, Neil noted Jakari White, 6'3", 180-pound North Dakota State forward, was electric this past season. 17.1 points, 4.3 rebounds, 2.3 assists on 45% shooting. Another one of those boosted year additions because of that extra JUCO season that he is being afforded. They have reached out to a D2 transfer as well, Wes Ennis, 6'2", 200-pound guard who's heard from schools like Xavier, St. Louis, Creighton. He averaged 20 points, three assists, and 4 rebounds on 41.1% shooting from outside this past season. High volume too, over 210 attempts on that ledger. And then also JaMychal Stillwell, another beefy forward, Neil, out of Milwaukee, 6'8", 225 pounds, 13 points, monstrous player on the boards, 10.7 rebounds per game, and was efficient at that, shooting 46.8% from the field. He has had a ton of interest so far in the transfer portal. These kind of wings, though, Neil, I think you got to get at least one, and it wouldn't hurt to have 2 of those 6'6" to 6'9", 210 to 235 pound maulers on the kind of fringe line of that front court, back court designation that can help you tip the scales a little bit more favorably on the rebounding front. And if they're able to get a guy like JaMychal Stillwell, then that would help tremendously in that aspect, because he's a guy, like I mentioned, 10.7 rebounds per game, one of the best and most efficient rebounders in the country. He could really help a UC team that was one of the worst teams in the Big 12 across the conference slate in rebounding the basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a big time addition too, Russ. And that, like you mentioned too, 13 rebounds, 10 points, but he is a physical bruiser there on the boards. He will go, and he's an athletic forward as well. They'll be able to go in there and get you a couple rebounds and maybe even be that 6 to 10 rebound kind of game for a forward that you want, right? Especially in the Big 12, you're going to have to be physical. You're going to have to be strong. You're going to have to crash the glass and be aggressive. And that's something JaMychal Stillwell does very well. And it's also worth noting too, Russ, while we're talking about the transfer portal, obviously Cincinnati is set to play in the Crown in 2 weeks, or kickoff next week, roughly. But overall, on top of it, transfer portal opens today, so it's going to be interesting to see what might really come out of this here in the next couple of days as the team prepares to take off for Las Vegas.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been no word that any UC players are gonna bow out. I think I fully expect the
whole
majority,
roster,
if not the entire roster. Maybe 1 or 2 guys that are definitely not going to be part of the team and want to get a head start on finding their next location won't be a part of it. But then if they don't play, they don't get access to the potential NIL windfall by winning the tournament. So that's a decision they're going to have to make in that sense. I would expect a pretty healthy full roster from Cincinnati. And at that point, we'll get to a full Crown preview on next week's first show of the week. But yeah, you see, I haven't seen odds yet, Neil, on any sports books. I think they're waiting until maybe this coming weekend to put them up for overall kind of winning odds for the Crown tournament. I would guess Cincinnati is going to be right up there in the top 3 to 4 odds teams to lift this trophy, given where they compare to the rest of the 15 teams in the field. Get to a break here, and then a cool nugget on Luke Kandra after we get full testing numbers from Cincinnati's only kind of definitively projected NFL drafted prospect this coming cycle. And then we'll touch on our top thing to watch for as spring football ramps back up following spring break this week. Stay with us on Bearcat Blitz presented by Bet Online. Neil, real quick before we get to spring football returning to Nippert Stadium this weekend beyond, Luke Kandra wowed at Big 12 Pro Days this past week, mounting a 9.19 relative athletic score, according to Math Bomb. People can look up RAS on Google to get a more definitive breakdown of what relative athletic score means, but it basically means a 9.19 out of a possible 10 means he's one of the most athletic guards in the entire draft class. And Neil, somehow he has not really risen on draft boards. I'll get the latest update on Consensus Big Board when I get your reaction to these numbers, but a 32.5-inch vertical, 9.64 percentile on that one, 96 percentile again on his broad jump, 9 foot, 5-inch broad jump, and ran a 5.17 40-yard dash. That's in the 82nd percentile. Was not good in the shuttle or the 3-cone. Did not eclipse the 61st percentile in either category, but that's not as relevant, Neil, for a guy mixing it up in the phone booths that Luke Kandra is going to be mixing it up with at the guard position in the NFL. Strong stuff from Luke Kandra, Neil. And at this point, with that athletic profile, the consistency in terms of staying on the field and avoiding injury throughout his college career, the intangibles off the field with how great of a leader he is, and the overall tape metrics, the down-to-down play, snap to snap, I'm starting to wonder how Luke Kandra makes it into the 4th round and into day 3 next month. I would be shocked at this rate if Luke Kandra is not at least talked about as a 3rd-round pick or the best player on the board available once we get to the end of the 2nd day of the 2025 NFL Draft.
No, I'm right there with you, Russ, and it's worth noting, too. I mean, we talk about his leadership, we talk about his character, his ability to stay healthy, consistency, but, Russ, it's also worth mentioning he is arguably one of the strongest guards in college football. I mean, you and I saw it up close and personal. He is a freak athlete. I mean, bench pressing 33 reps at the NFL Combine, top amongst offensive linemen as well. Then he had a great showing at Pro Day in Frisco, Texas last week. So, overall, things are starting to trend in the right direction for Luke Kandra, but I'm sitting there right there with you, Russ. I do not understand and don't think he will be there on day 3 of the NFL draft, continuing to prove teams wrong about rising his stock, right? Everyone's kind of looking at the metrics and whatnot, but Russ, after he tested this week, you mentioned the 9.1 RAS score. There's a good chance Luke Kandra might be going a lot higher than people expected in terms of next month's NFL draft. And hopefully for us, that is the case. We do get to see a 3rd-round pick or potentially late 2nd, early 3rd-round draft pick. But overall, I don't see Luke Kandra making it out of round 3. I do not.
Will be cool for the Kandra family to see that happen. Quizzically, though, and this might just be because there haven't been as many updated mock drafts since these numbers went live over the past 5 days, but Kandra is down to 163rd on the Consensus Big Board, about a 20-spot drop from where he sat 2-3 weeks ago. So I don't get it. I don't really get it. I don't see what, I don't know what part of his profile you can poke a hole into besides the athleticism, like quick burst athletic testing, which is not as relevant for a guy playing the guard position. You're kind of siphoned in athletically between the center and the tackle. Not that you don't have to move well and move quickly on guard poles and stuff like that and traps and all that, but it's not as important as many other positions on the football field. Speaking of positions on the football field, my top storyline, Neil, as UC football gets back in action for spring, the rest of this month and beyond, is there was a good amount of orange jerseys not in action last Monday, or was it last Monday or 2 Mondays ago? Yeah, almost 2 weeks ago now, when I was there, or 2 weeks Wednesday. It'll be 2 weeks on Wednesday. The first practice of the spring session, a quizzical amount of guys that were not participating, that were wearing the orange injury jerseys. I'm not reading a whole lot into it. I'm just anticipating seeing a lot of those guys back in action from spring break. And I asked Scott Satterfield about it after the first practice, and he said, yeah, just nothing super serious with most of those guys. They're just we're trying to onboard them a little bit more smoothly from a really, really intense winter workout period. So I'll note if we don't see some of those guys get back on the field, we'll note their names. But other than that, Neil, I mean, I don't even think it's notable to mention any of the guys that didn't suit up then, because it was such a kind of shells type of week. You're just wearing helmets. You're just getting back into the on-field workout portion of things in the calendar. Nothing to seriously read into, but I'll start reading into it a little bit more if that orange jersey grouping is still peppered with a lot of guys wearing those beanies this coming Wednesday. But what about you? What are you looking for to see this week and beyond out of Cincinnati football spring practice?
Yeah, first off, I'll piggyback off of what you said. Obviously, it's still early into spring ball. Obviously, that was week 1. I don't think there's really much to look into, considering they were off last week for spring break. I don't think there's really much to look into, especially after the hard workout season that Nico Palizzetti has put these guys through. It's just kind of precautionary things, too. It's something that's always happened at the beginning of spring ball. But I think the biggest thing for me, last week I talked about the offensive line as my biggest thing to look forward to. But this year, I'm going to flip it back to the defensive side of the ball. I'm looking at the defensive line group, right? Last year, that was a group that was banged up with Jalen Hunt out, Michael Coleman out. And then it just seemingly seemed they were banged up at that defensive line, defensive end position overall. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that defensive line and that defensive edge group kind of plays out. Obviously, you get Dante Corleone to return, but then Michael Coleman comes back from the Achilles injury. Jalen Hunt's back from the knee injury. Then you bring in Jalen White McLean out of Old Dominion University, and then you have the development of Marquez Parker. It's going to be interesting to see how those guys really progress, especially a guy like Marquez Parker, who's going in from year 1, who saw significant time as a freshman, to see how he kind of makes that freshman to sophomore jump there. And how do those transfers come in from Micah Coleman, who was at Eastern Michigan, missed all last season, was very productive at EMU. It's going to be interesting to see what his role will be for this team. Obviously, a big defensive edge, 6'5", 250, can really move, really athletic. And then it's going to be interesting to see how does Jalen White McLean fit into that role as well. So overall, that's the position group I'm looking at the most here in this upcoming week.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, but there's not we're not going to see live tackling. We're not going to see the real kind of
you won't see
gauge
pads
points.
Probably this week.
Right. We're not going to see the real gauge points for how a defense is actually going to flow for a little while, but to start seeing and keying in on some of those rotations, I think is insight that we can definitely draw on. So good stuff there, Neil, of noting the defensive line and how it's ultimately going to shake out with a group that outside of Dante Corleone, Neil, it's going to look, I mean, Marquez Parker mixed in there a little bit last year as well, but it's going to look largely different in that rotation for this August and beyond. He's Neil Meyer. I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz. We'll talk to you again later on this week for our second show presented by Bet Online. Have a great Monday, everybody.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a 3.